Welcome to the show, Brain Health, Unchaining Your Pain. And I am really excited to be talking to the phenomenal Kate Cook. Welcome to the show, Kate.
I can be called Kate Book if you like.
I was thinking of your book that I wanted to talk about, which was positive nutrition. That's why my brain was already ahead of itself. So
well, that's good. And a head brain is better than a behind brain. That's marvelous.
So welcome to the show. So for those that don't know Kate is a business and wellness expert and co-founder at the People Energy Partnership, helping people and organizations to fuel physical energy and enhance emotional health, which is a really important topic in my world. She's worked with a hugely wide range of organizations, and I won't list them all, but there are many, and you can find out more about Kate on her website and also through her LinkedIn profile, which is there for you below. So welcome. I'm really excited to talk about brain health in the context of nutrition and your journey that you've taken to get to where you are today. But before we start, I'd love to know, what is optimal brain health for you personally in the context of your journey that you've been on?
Well, I just think that brain health is just so important. And you know, you were kind enough to share your story earlier. And I think everybody's been through an experience of stress or trauma or all of these things. And I remember really in my 20s, really not having the optimal brain health. So I'm now in my 60s, or I'm 60. So can I say yes, 60, woo! But yeah, so I worked for an interior designer in those days. So I wasn't a nutritionist. And just remember being so knackered, and she was so knackered as well. And our blood sugar, so our energy, the way we were controlling our energy was all over the place, you know. Yeah. And so that we actually were interior designers. So I did up the Turnberry Hotel with her, which now Trump owns, believe it or not. But anyway, there was lots of chintz in those days, and we would have dinner together, and we would just literally be smacking into the soup. We'd be so knackered at the end of the day, and wouldn't be able to string a sentence together. So that thing about forgetting words, and it was really a combo, I think, of just not knowing my purpose in life at that point, A, and B, being bored. You know, everybody else was like killing to be an interior designer. I absolutely hated it. I couldn't give one monkey's about people's curtains, nor, you know, people like they're 2 millimeters too short. And I was like, and your problem is, you know, what is wrong with you? You know, it's just like, just keeps the light out. You know, I was not really cut out to be an interior designer. So, you know, I suppose that's a very long way of answering your question to say, what does it mean to you? I think it just means being totally engaged, being on purpose, being able to recall facts, and especially what I do as a speaker. I mean, I'm a corporate speaker in the corporate world, so presentations, well-being programs, all that sort of thing. And of course, you have to have all the facts and a complex story at your fingertips, and being able to have that, being able to also use all of those facts, figures, everything, the story of nutrition, be able to inspire people by different contexts. You know, I'm also an anthropologist. I'm doing an MA in anthropology and anthropology of food. So sort of bringing in those stories, bringing in the nutrition stories, bringing in the personal stories, and being able to put all that quite complex stuff together and entertain people, and you know, and all of those things, and stick to your purpose. So the contrast, I think, between that 20-year-old self and really thinking, actually, I was losing my marbles then, you know, and having kind of like a brain on fire. I don't mean an inflamed brain. I mean an optimal, funny, you know, serving, lovely little friend that you can take with you on your journey.
Yeah, do you know, I love that. And I think the fact that you've mentioned purpose is such an important one, because we often don't think about purpose as an important asset of brain health, but it's really vital. And I like to think of purpose is the connection that we have to ourselves and to our core values and beliefs, in the direction of travel we want to go in life. You know, it's our moral compass, and we choose the path that we want to take, and walking down the path you want to go, and knowing where your destination is, where do you want to go, what mountain do you want to climb, is really important. And not having that sense of purpose or feeling off purpose. Or some people like think, how on earth can I decide what my purpose is in life? Well, it's also about living purposefully each and every day. So doing something that is serving you and in alignment with who you are and want to be is so important.
And I think the thing is with people looking for their purpose is they're expecting a massive great lightning strike to come down and go, you know, like the voice of God or something, go, oh, you know, Kate Cook, you should be a nutritionist. What? Me? You know, are you speaking to me, oh Lord? You know, sort of idea where it's kind of, you know, from some bush or something, burning bush, you know, it's like, you know, but no, it's usually nothing like that. It's usually just a very quiet little voice that says, you know, I think for me with nutrition, it was really that sort of, actually, you know, interestingly, the way I became a nutritionist was really about optimal brain function, actually, because it was really about personal development, in effect. So being really optimal and being as good as I can be, and being of service as much as I can be, but also being the best person I can be. Do you know what I mean? All of those things. Rather than a lot of nutritionists come because they're already in ill health. I was never, ever in ill health, luckily. It was really this, right, what's optimal? How can I be better? But how can I use my brain better? How can I use, you know, it sounds a bit cheesy, personal development, but that sort of really that coaching element that inspired me. And I think for a lot of people, as I say, they're looking for that huge purpose. You know, what is my purpose? To be a doctor, or to be this, to be that. But it can be this very quiet voice that just goes, you're on the wrong path. You know, things like anxiety, you know, is a great gift, or it can be, just to say, listen, you're on the wrong path. You need to change. You need to do something else. And most people don't listen to that little voice that says, you know, look, what is it that even you can fan with a little, you know, keep that fire burning, you know, sort of like before it explodes into a, you know, oh wow, that's my flame. But sometimes it takes a lot of work to do that.
It does.
Yeah.
And I love that your journey, you know, was started with nutrition, because actually for me, in terms of optimal brain health, it also started with nutrition for me, because I had to like turn the mirror on myself and go, do you know, eating ice cream every night to feel better in myself because of the situation I'm in at work is not serving me, because I'm overweight, and that's not where I want to be. I want to be the fittest I've ever been. And we often think as nutrition in the context of, if we talk about mental health, as a separate discussion. And I love the fact that you bring this up in your book, Positive Nutrition, is that people kind of consider the nutritional aspect as almost an afterthought in the context of getting the best out of themselves and their engine of life, rather than being the first thing to think about to optimize themselves.
It's an interesting thing, because you know, obviously I'm working a lot in corporates at the moment, and the big thing is, quite rightly, is mental health, and the first thing, you know, it's probably quite controversially, but you know, that's my middle name, but is to really is, you know, we're medicalizing ordinary distress into something that's a medical condition like mental health. It's actually, you know, it's normal for people to be distressed, especially after the 2 years we've all been through. So it's interesting how actually that's probably more about emotional health than it is about so-called mental health. And obviously there is such a thing called mental health in the construction industry. It's the biggest kind of risk factor in health and safety is really suicide. So, you know, that is obviously serious mental health, and where people are under threat and danger. And it's definitely to be identified. But for a lot of us, it's about, look, we're not coping, or we've got other problems at home, and you know, but we're not mentally ill at that point. We're really not. But so I think there's a problem, which is we're medicalizing ordinary distress into mental illness, which I think which victimizes people and makes them into, well, the way to solve that really is through medication, possibly. You know,
which is overwhelmed anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, but the other thing I've struggled with really is to get corporates really to understand fully is obviously your head is joined up to your body. That is a really tricky one to get through. So obviously, they say in a healthy body is a healthy mind, but they can just trying to get that connection is really quite difficult for people to understand. So that when I go and do programs, they'll often say, we're not really doing nutrition at the moment. And I go, well, actually, when I'm doing programs, I'm never doing a kind of like eat more carrots program. We're doing sort of sleep, and I run a red thread of nutrition through it because it's the foundation, I would say. But it's not the thing. That the sleep is obviously the benefit. The nutrition is just a tool, the way you get to it, whereas people see nutrition as the thing rather than the tool. And really it's this connection of what then, if you've got the foundations in place, what it can do for your mental health. Because also nutrition is so it's got so many mechanisms of action. It's not just, it's complex. It's a really complex system. So it's, if you're eating that carrot, of course, it's the fiber, it's the vitamins, it's even might be even the energy in the food, which sounds a bit ning-nong, but they measure these things. It could be all sorts of things that we don't even have a clue about. Whereas people, as I say, see this thing as kind of mental health and then nutrition. No, it's like actually
it's related.
It's completely related, of course, and the foundation for everything to do with health and well-being.
Absolutely, 100% agree. And I love the fact that you drew on emotional health as well. And I like to think of it as an emotional well-being. Is often that's missed in the context of health. I don't think we talk enough about people's emotional health. We spend a lot of time talking about people's physical health, and we may spend some time talking about people's mental health, and there's been more of a light shone on that, but we definitely don't take the time to explore how people are feeling emotionally. And I think that's our emotions drive everything. It drives our behaviors, our thoughts drive our emotions. Our emotions are a signal to move us towards something that's going to be helpful or give us pleasure, and away from something that's going to hurt us. And
I think, sorry to interrupt, I was going to say, I think the phrase mental health should be completely avoided.
Absolutely.
Unless it is for critical health problems like schizophrenia, severe depression, because I think it downplays the really serious aspect of mental health. I mean, genuinely life-threatening mental health, or even life enjoyment threatening mental health, etc. Because people under stress can say, I've got a mental health problem, but they haven't really got a mental health problem. They've got a work problem. They've got a 4-letter word problem, which is work. They're being overworked. They don't have the resources to cope with it. And it's not at that point mental health. It's not a mental health crisis. It is a crisis, but it's a work crisis. Issue. It can be cultural, absolutely, it can be cultural. It can be purpose, basically, which is you're in the wrong flipping job, so you need to rethink that. But it doesn't mean to say that you have a mental problem. It might be your work actually has the problem, not you. So
absolutely.
I think it's really about grabbing back our power in the way we use language. And after all, language is, we think of it as this very inert thing. We use language the whole time, but the way we use language controls culture, or culture controls language. And you have to be so careful with the language that you use and its meanings, and how that can impact people and their lives. So so emotional health, obviously stress is a huge thing in the workplace, and of course there is mental health, absolutely, but be careful how we use that for people who not genuinely, because I think people who feel they have mental health issues obviously feel they have a mental health issue, but it's to be able to then grab those quite serious cases and to help them, as opposed to being kind of missed in the whole tide of people who think they've got mental health problems as opposed to emotional health problems.
Agreed.
Or stress problems, or family problems, or any of these, or sleep problems. Any of these things lead to downgrade in quality of life, for sure.
And I absolutely agree with you on that. And I think, language, I love to draw on the issue of language, because mental health has come out of what I would like to think of, the word mental has come out of the dark ages, based on people used to be put in mental asylums and you were considered on the wrong side of normal, and so you would be labeled as mental in the context of the word. And even the way we talk about mental health, the questions that come up now is, are you okay, which is an immediate label that the fault is with the person, because you start thinking, oh my God, is there something wrong with me? Rather than asking a better question, is everything okay? Which allows the person to look outward at what all of the factors are, which goes into root cause analysis.
Yeah, it's very, very good point.
The problem they're experiencing.
Yeah, because it's easy, because immediately, and again, I think this is another one of my bugbears, which is, of course, you wouldn't stick your hand up to really say that you have a mental health problem, really, even if it's well-intentioned, and I get that it's completely well-intentioned, and I get that it can be really serious, and I get that it needs to be kind of, and it's great that people are now on the lookout for people who really need help. But you absolutely, to your point, is everything okay, as opposed to are you okay, is actually the difference in language, very, very small, but actually the way that lands is just phenomenally different. Yeah, totally. Yeah, really interesting.
So I'd love to know your journey into becoming a nutritional expert and coach, and how you transition from this 20-year-old where you obviously your energy levels were, you were like on a roller coaster of energy to get through the day and week, and you didn't feel on purpose, to where you are today as a professional speaker and trainer. How did that journey evolve? How did you sort of move from being an interior designer into being a nutritional expert?
Well, I think it's I did actually economic history and politics at university. So I was an arts student, and but I was always really interested, actually, funnily enough, in skin health. So I mean, it's really from a vanity reason, actually. So I was always doing these mad, not diets as in losing weight diets, but it was sort of like weird sort of things in vogue where they'd say, like, have you tried the goat's cheese diet or the goat's milk beauty regime? And I'd be like, yes, let me try. In the days before goats, it was like substantially difficult to come across any goat's milk, so obviously that's why it was in vogue, because it was about 400 quid a pint, in those days. So I was really interested in all of that. But I mean, and then I went into all these weird, when I left university, I went into I went into the art business and did some various stuff, and sort of forgot my connections with the importance of diet and, something so superficial actually as skin health. And but anyway, it was really the sort of wanting to find my purpose, knowing that I was in the wrong job, obviously with the interior design, thing, and sort of knowing that there was kind of more to life, and that I had more to give, and more to give in terms of service, and also, I am so substantially unsuited to working in any kind of structured environment. I'd last 2 minutes in a real job. I mean, I'd go in all enthusiastic, and then I'd get the sack on day 2. I'd be like, yes, let's change her. Woohoo! Yeah, this is fabulous. And they'd say, Kate, you need to do this. I'm like, why? And I'd like, goodbye. See, it's like I would so not be suited to. And that was partly it. I felt really clamped down in a sort of proper grown up work environment. So sort of working for myself was always something I think was suited to do. And so really going back to the sort of days of the goats diets, I was really wanting to optimize through personal development. And actually, funnily enough, Anthony Robbins, cheesy as that may sound, he of the big radiator grill teeth, he has a big component of what he does is actually nutrition. Now, I didn't get my nutrition from there. I then went on to the quiet voice, as I was saying earlier. You know, it wasn't like a loud voice, but saying, "Listen, there's more to life. There's more to you. You know, you need to find the vehicle to travel on." And for me, the vehicle was nutrition. So meaning it wasn't my, you know, as I say, some people come to nutrition because it's resurrected them, it's saved them. But for me, it was really like just like a, you know, and I think in the Indian tradition, they have Ganesh, who travels on a couple of rats, the transport rats. So for me, the transport rats was nutrition. So it was just a way and access to be able to talk, to be able to find a hook for my passion on optimizing potential and optimizing health and independence, in other words, of everything, meaning away from relying on anybody but yourself to be optimal. So you know, you don't have to rely on a doctor. Well, you do, even if obviously you have something seriously wrong with you, but keeping optimally healthy is much better than having to go into a reliance of relying on other people. And you know, if you've got your health, you've got nearly everything in order to potentiate, if that's a word, yourself.
I think that's so important. Sorry to cut across you there. I think that's so important. And I love the fact that you use nutrition. It's kind of like the foundation, isn't it, for everything. And we forget that food is medicine. And food, we need the right foods to feed our body and feed our mind, all of which are interconnected through our
it's really important. But I think what nutrition can get into is what actually this guy, he's called Scrigornik, what was he called? Scrives, Gregor Skrines, I think it's called. Anyway, it's called Nutritionism. The book is called Nutritionism, and actually, it was referred to in the Omnivore's Dilemma, which was quite a popular book. And basically, in this book, it said that the trouble is sometimes with nutrition is it takes the elements out of food and makes them into, so for example, an oyster, one of the key elements is zinc. You know, it's very good for you, it's good for the brain actually, and blah blah blah. But you have to be careful, I think, with food, is to take it out of context. And you know, it's the synergistic effect of food that really is the magic. It's not really the oysters are full of zinc, although they are, and although zinc is good for brain health and all the rest of it, that's great. But I think people can lose sight of actually the other side of food, which is the community, the soul. And as nutritionists, we can do that because it becomes about kind of optimizing health through using key nutrients, which is cool as well, by the way. But I think we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that food is much more connecting and larger than that. That's why I've done anthropology of food, which is about culture around food as well. So bringing those things together, I hope that doesn't make it sound too complicated.
No, not at all. I want to draw into that because I love that.
Well, there is a place for, I mean, because we are actually, our training is in effect, it's optimum nutrition, or used to be called personalized nutrition. I'm a nutritional therapist. So we are trained to deal with individual people who might come to us for individual things that might not be working, like, let's say, irritable bowel syndrome. So we are drilling down into using very specific nutrients for that kind of food, using food as medicine in effect through that. So there is a place for looking at deficiencies and all the rest of it. But for ordinary people who don't feel they have anything kind of wrong with them, the way we look at food as well is to look at these tiny little elements of food and to make it do something. And it's very Western concept, you know, it has to do something and be kind of like what do you call it? It has to sort of, well, also, you know, how that can go so wrong when we drill down into the elements of food and and sometimes the science can go so wrong politically for years and years and years. We were talking earlier about fat. That's one example about how one person grabs the narrative and then runs with it. Another one is salt, actually. But I think it was called Macintosh, and he just grabbed this concept of how salt is evil for everybody, and then blankets the whole thing with the evilness, like with fat, the same argument. So we have to be really careful not to kind of it's like almost playing God. I think we do that a lot as humans. We play God to say, aha, what is life? We know about life. Let's kind of like Frankenstein's monster, kind of recreate life through these composite bits. And instead you get this kind of, yes, you get a working kind of Frankenstein, but at the same time you lose the humanity. And I think we have to be careful with that in nutrition, which is, yes, it's a really good tool. Yes, you can optimize health. Yes, it's fantastic. Individual nutrients can do the world of good, and especially if you need them clinically, but not to lose the humanity, community, bonding, everything, life, and the miracle of food through our kind of examination of the very small.
Yeah. I love that. I love that, because we are all made up of individual elements. Every single person is made up of individual parts of nutrients and a whole host of complex compounds that ultimately you can break down into a single molecule. But actually we're all different, and we all interact differently, and the way that those elements interact in our body are different based on how we are composed. And I want to draw on the community piece, because I love to bring this into play from a gut health perspective with my daughter. Is the community starts in our gut. So we have trillions of bugs in our gut, healthy ones and some not healthy ones, and we have to feed the community of bugs that are in our gut that help serve us as individual humans, and the community that exists within our body, and then that individual feeding feeds the community and our interactions externally. So it all really starts with looking at it in a community-based perspective, right down to the microorganisms that interact with each other at a cellular level and within our cells, but particularly within our gut health and the microbiome that exists, that is such an important part of achieving optimal or just a functional brain.
I think it's interesting because this has become the big flavor of the nutritional month, in effect. I mean, when I started 25 years ago in training as a nutritionist, of course, gut's always been important for nutritionists. I mean, Confucius even said that bliss begins in the bowel, and that was a long time ago. So, obviously, we've been on to the fact that the gut is very important in health for a while, for sure. But I think it's interesting to think that these are the things that we know about nutrition and food and all the rest of it. It's about what we don't know, I think, is more fascinating in a way that we tend to separate these things out into gut health or even brain health. I mean, I know that's a convenient shorthand because people like to kind of like say, my brain's not really working, I need some brain health. But as you know, of course, it's all connected. But I think the most fascinating thing about gut health is how it's connected with our place on the planet in terms of soil health. So, in effect, the soil has a microbiome. It has the mycelia of the fungi that communicate
underground,
through messages and through this intelligence there, and that we in effect are so separated from the earth, but yet we are so part of it that our microbiome is in effect a reflection of the soil microbiome. So we're in effect, our community here is also an important reflection of our community in terms of our planetary health. And the big one obviously is pollution for that, as things like glyphosates, as you know, which is a class of chemicals, that's a herbicide that is actually kills off the microbiome. That is the mechanism through something called the shikimate pathway, which I'm sure you're familiar with, which is, it doesn't kill us, but it kills the bacteria, so causes all sorts of problems. And of course, as we know, the bacteria can communicate with the brain through photons of light, literally. And I find that so magic. It's sort of, it's sending out, sort of emitting frequencies and stuff we can't even guess at. Those are the things we know about, let alone the things, as I said, that we just don't know about yet. So yeah, that's again a very long way of saying, gut health is very important, but the things we don't know are kind of going to be more important, and our connection with the community we have inside to the community we have outside ourselves, and our position on the planet, and how we fit into soil health as well, which is, of course, we are the soil is us. We have separated that out, and that's part of the reason why we have poor gut health, of course.
Yeah, and actually I've noticed that some of the interventions necessary to support people who have poor gut health, and has been used in people with extreme COVID, has actually been using soil derivatives to restore the gut microbiome. So we're absolutely on the same wavelength as you.
Yeah, even using earthworms, which it's like turn the poor old earthworms into types of enzymes that actually also so you're using soil through the worms, poor things. But so
and I think it's really interesting, and I'd love to touch on this in how our world has evolved, because I know we talked about this just recently offline. It is how our world has evolved from when we were, living surrounded by the dirt, surrounded by the soil, ingesting the soil, to a very clean, very different, very plastic packaged artificial world that we are in today, and how that really influences how the nutritional changes that we see have really influenced our ability to achieve optimal health in our brain and whole body. Could you talk about what you've really observed as part of your experience as a nutritional expert?
Well, I think a big one, obviously, as you've referred to, is in terms of it sometimes can sound a bit overwhelming, because people talk about toxicity in the environment, and it's sort of like you think to yourself, kind of like, oh, well, there's not really very much I can do about that. But you're getting toxins, obviously, or challenges to our bodies through things like plastics in the environments, through these are xenoestrogens, so they influence hormones, and people know about how that can influence like our waters, and how little frogs can turn into, or boy frogs can turn into girl frogs at the same time, hermaphrodite frogs, and all these kind of problems with sex in effect with the frogs, and and other animals obviously as well, influenced by that. So this pervasive toxicity can get into a lot of our environment, including the glyphosates we talked about, and other pesticides and other interventions as well. So, it can sound quite overwhelming, but we do have enzymes that can, to a certain extent, mop up damage in the body. They're called SOD and GP, that are mopping up this kind of damage in the body. But of course, it's very enhanced by certainly what we don't do. So things like drinking, smoking, poor nutrition, poor fats in processed food, and all these things. And then, finally what we do. So, obviously the fresher the food, and also I'm a big fan of organic, and I know it's expensive, but, I always say, it depends, because I'm not very material. So I don't really have a really good car or go on fancy holidays. I would just far rather have a fantastic meal than I ever would, go on a fancy holiday. But that's just me, So, and I know in the cost of living crisis, it's not easy. So choosing which products you have organic is obviously a cascade. But you know, it's not the answer to everything organic, but obviously you've got the minus the pesticides, the foods minus the pesticides, which of course are designed to stick on the food, because you wouldn't want the pesticides, if you were a pesticide farmer, you know, a person who uses pesticide, to wash off the fruit, because obviously that's not going to be any good for the reason why you used a pesticide.
Yeah, and actually people who live in areas where they do the pesticide spraying on the farms can have huge problems from a respiratory perspective, or certainly from a skin perspective, because of the damage that the pesticides do to our skin and to our ability to breathe. And we know that, you know, I love that you talked about skin as one of your focuses initially on nutrition, because we often call skin as our third brain, and it's the largest organ in our body. And often we express,
yeah, absolutely. And
yeah, often we express conditions that are actually going on in our brain, in our skin, before we actually acknowledge that we're experiencing, you know, stress is a classic, that we'll express stress through our skin before we acknowledge that we're stressed emotionally or mentally.
Well, that's really interesting, because I mean, you know, obviously you see people who's, you know, who look, you know, sort of grey and tired, and, you know, and that is obviously an indication, isn't it? But I've never really thought about the connection with brain health, and that being the sort of canary in the mine kind of idea. Yeah. So so anyway, I was thinking I'm waffling on about but the point is that your detoxification kind of pathways, including optimizing these little enzymes that help mop up damage, is really done through, you know, optimal food, and you know, and be careful not to buy in too much to political fashions in nutrition, and just be very wary of people who kind of say that they have found the way, and that this is the way. You know, you just have to look back really to the fact that we are omnivores, and we eat a lot of diets all around the world, serve lots of different people. So there is no usually one completely optimal diet. It depends on circumstances, environment. You know, if you were in the Masai Mara, you'd be eating blood and milk, and if you were an Inuit, you'd be eating seal blubber, whatever. So there's lots and lots of different diets throughout the world, and we're served by them. I think the one thing that the guy called Weston Price came across, he was a dentist in the 1930s, was in effect commodities. So eating industrial food is the big fat killer, you know, in any diet. It doesn't matter if you're eating processed food, that is a real indication and start of poor health.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think we're actually saturated with processed food rather than saturated with saturated fat. It's the processed food that's really the biggest killer for people, and the hidden unhealthy fats, the hidden toxins that sit in food, the hidden sugars that's impossible to unless you're a nutritional expert. You know, they changed the name of sugar. It's not just called sugar. It's called dextrose and maltose and all sorts of other different names. It's just sugar that sits in the
and I think, you know, I mean, obviously sugar is a commodity, so, you know, obviously that's not probably a health product, but you know, again, I think you know, it's how sometimes the food industry separates components of food out of the food, and then, you know, the food or that product becomes demonized, like we were talking about saturated fat. It's like, actually, you know, things like meat, actually, you know, is demonized for being high in saturated fat, but actually the highest component of meat isn't necessarily saturated fat. It's monounsaturated fat and other fats that make up the product. So you can sort of demonize something that actually makes up a component of the food, rather than looking at the whole food itself, looking at the benefits of the whole food as opposed to components of it. I don't know, you know, because it's easier, and I think humans react better to say, right, don't eat blah, because blah is bad for you, like, right, got it. You don't have to sort of think, okay, you don't have to sort of put it through the thought computer to say, well, that doesn't make sense. You just get the sort of top level, and most people can only really process the top level. But you can see in nutritional kind of recommendations, sometimes and usually a flip-flop from advice. In the 70s, 80s, it was the F plan diet, and then it was, now it's sort of ketogenic and low carb, and and different, or vegan, different trends, paleo, pagan, you could get anything. So everybody's got the sort of way, it's like, oh, it's my way, I've got, it's keto is the big thing, or it's this, or it's that. And actually there's probably components to all of those things that are great, but it sounds a bit like I'm doing myself out of a job to say, actually, it's simpler than we think, which is great food, cooked well, cooked yourself, obviously fresh, and kind of traditional, if you like, meaning actually, not snacking endlessly on stuff between meals, which can raise and drop the blood sugar. And perhaps it is only eating 2 meals a day, because that's what we probably would have eaten as workers in the old days. If we'd been posh, we'd have been stuffing our face all the time. But look where that got them, so. Anyway.
So what would you say your top tips are in the context of people optimizing their health, but through the lens of nutrition?
Well, it's definitely, I'd spend a lot of time kind of regurgitating the blood sugar story. So, it's about balancing blood sugar to get stable insulin, which all about in health, in brain health. I mean, that's huge. About it's stimulating unnecessary inflammation in the body. Of course, inflammation is key if you need to be inflamed to bring to heal wounds, for example. But you don't want a fire out of control in the body, which is very consuming and also takes up a lot of energy and reserves in the body. And they think it's the sort of key to all degenerative disease, which is untamed inflammation, which we get through a rubbish diet, rubbish lifestyle, and all the rest we've talked about. So so I think the big thing is, and I sort of labor, is getting that insulin story straight, and how to do that through nutrition, which is key. And I think the second thing is kind of stemming on from that, is about breaking the fast. So again, these days people work on these trends of the 5-2 diets, or the intermittent fasting, which is great. That's all the fancy footwork add-on stuff that you can add on to the nutrition once you've got the key sort of skeleton there. So the next thing is breaking the fast, which is breakfast. It doesn't have to be at 8 o'clock, but it's sort of getting the right breakfast, the one that sort of will optimize blood sugar and balance
your blood sugar throughout the day.
Yeah.
And I think that's really interesting, because I always feel I have this mini fight on my hands, especially for children, is the type of breakfast that we eat now is often a processed breakfast through the marketing of the food industry and all the cereals that they produce. And actually you may as well almost eat a bowl of sugar because it very quickly turns to sugar. And so you have all these children that have a massive slump at the beginning of the day, and then they become hugely energetic and erratic, because they're all because they go through this sugar high and low.
And then they're giving them Ritalin to give them the uppers and the downers. It's just like, then you give them drugs, the kids.
Because you think it's them that's faulty, rather than actually addressing the root cause of nutrition.
I mean, the third thing, just because, the blood sugar, the breaking the fast. And the third thing is really about the quality, which again, I referred to in brief, which was, if you can support organic or support regenerative farming, or local, I suppose that all comes under that umbrella of community and engaging with food where you can. It's really difficult if you live in a city, but it's not impossible, and it does require a bit more effort. And that's where you lose people on the journey, because they're like, oh, I haven't got time for that. But think of all the plastics and everything you use in supermarkets, and how you can go on box schemes and food drops, and and actually with a tiny bit more effort make this connection with somebody who you can look in the eyes, who you can engage with for your food, your most important resource.
Yeah, I'd love to dive back into where we first started, which was the emotional health piece, but dive into it in a bit more of a fun way and look at the fun facts, if you're ready for this. So we're looking at the 5 pillars remembered by the mnemonic facts, which is our feelings, our actions, our connections, our thoughts and our surroundings, all which influence our brain health. So let's just dive into feelings first. What's the funniest or most embarrassing thing that's ever happened to you?
Yes. Well, quickly, because I can tell a story, which is basically how I became a nutritionist. Really, was that somebody I knew was looking absolutely fantastic. So it's really that sort of vanity thing again, with me. It's sort of somebody, probably their skin looking really amazing. I was like, wow, you're looking amazing. What do you do? And they were really cagey, wouldn't tell me what they were doing. So I then sort of, in the end, they said, look, I've been to this nutritionist. So they gave me the number. I said, great. So I just called them. Said, right, I'm turning up. And it was in Balham, and I had to come from Fulham, and it was quite a journey. And, and I ended up in this person's house in the middle of nowhere. I was like, great. What are you going to tell me about nutrition? This is before I was a nutritionist, obviously. And anyway, so she said, well, let's go upstairs. Let's get stuck in, shall we? And I was like, stuck in? Stuck into what? It turned out she was a colonic irrigation specialist. And she's just basically, and being British, I was like, I'm probably in the wrong appointment. But anyway, I was prepared to have a tube shoved up my bottom rather than say I was in the wrong appointment. So, yeah.
That is a brilliant story and so apt in the context of nutrition. But it's
anyway,
considered really healthy.
Actually. I was just like, God, I'm not sure about this at all, but anyway.
And did you feel better after it?
No, I mean, it was sort of generally, because actually she gave me a sort of, it wasn't just about the tube up the butt. It was, she'd given me a sort of like, just stuff we know about sort of diet, really. But it was really a start for me, because I think nobody really has that manual or skeleton of, like I teach it through blood sugar management.
Yeah.
That's the sort of backbone of what I teach. And onto that, you can bond on the fancy footwork. Whereas most people start off with the fancy footwork, like the 5-2, or they want to do a fast or something. And it's way too sort of advanced, if you like.
Yeah.
You got to get some basics.
Do the basics.
Yeah. So they tend to do it because they
lay your foundations.
Yeah, but laying the foundations. So this was about laying the foundations for me. And I think it's my interest in actually to go on to become a nutritionist.
Brilliant. And I'm just going to touch on one more: connection to yourself. What's the most important values that guide you in life? And I'm particularly interested in this because obviously you started feeling off purpose.
Yeah, well, I actually I devised a coaching program when I was in clinic about 20 years ago, and it's called the Life Map Method, and it's actually using collage and lots of different sort of elements. But one of the most important things is getting the values down. Your values, your operating system, and we worked about 7 different values, which I'm not going to remember now. Probably, well, you put me on the spot. But I think so. The most important values to me is integrity. Humor, family, fun. Lots of it is I just won't work with anybody who just like, I'm not having fun doing it, is immediate kind of turn off. Community is another one. And notice how far kind of like money or success comes on this list, like nowhere on it, because I'm always governed by kind of like people and connection and all of those values. And must be service, there very importantly, because you can't, I don't think, be in what you're in and what I'm in without that wanting to be of service and change our world, basically.
Well, I certainly think you live into your core values, because my cheek muscles are hurting with laughing and smiling so much from speaking with you. Okay, what would you say to anyone who is struggling with their achieving optimal health, and they just don't know which way to go? How do they start? What one piece of advice would you give to anyone?
Well, sorry to sound like a stuck record, but I go back to balance the blood sugar, because it balances the energy, balance the inflammation, balance the mood, balance the sleep. Everything stems from that. It sounds really like a one size fits all, but it's like so many things happen from that. So the first action is really breakfast, breaking the fast, and getting the breakfast, optimal breakfast. So instead of the cereal you were talking about earlier, is to look at, the quick version of this is to avoid sweet, fluffy and white food and go for thick, fibrous protein and fat. So on another day, I'll tell you what exactly that means. But basically, you're going for something like rye toast, if that's your thing. There's some controversy about how it doesn't help brain health, actually, all grain on the brain. So something like Perlmutter, Dr. Perlmutter and Grain Brain and stuff like that. But that having been said, something like rye bread, which is thick and fibrous, and then eggs, avocado, fish. So it's a sort of massive change on breakfast and making it much more like a Scandi breakfast, really. And once you've got that in play, everything comes from that. Your blood sugar balances, you feel better, and then you're able to make better choices. So instead of trying to change everything, is to change that and then go, wow, that makes such a difference. And then to bolt on these other things.
Yeah, I love that. And it's almost going back to the traditional English breakfast, actually, because the traditional English breakfast would be protein and, from the eggs and the meat that we would have traditionally. And then we get obviously some of the fiber from the beans, and traditional bread that we would have had at the time would have been much more nutritious than it is in today's world. So it's kind of reverting back to how we would have done historically.
And then you wouldn't have had the snacks, because again, it's quite a modern thing. It's a marketing thing, which was the finger of fudge. As you're not old enough to remember the finger.
I know, I remember that. It's just enough to give your kid a treat.
A finger of fudge is just enough to give your kids the treat. A finger of fudge is just enough. Anyway, it's full of Cadbury's goodness, of course. So, and very good to eat, apparently. So I can still remember that.
And full of sugar.
And full of
and trans fats
and trans fats, and very nice to eat. But that was the first campaign on convincing us we needed a snack between meals. I'm led to believe so. But if you get a sort of so-called proper breakfast in, then you're much more inclined to be able to bring dinner a bit earlier, and in fact just have 2 meals a day, as opposed to all the snacking and the other bits and bobs and triggering of the blood sugar along the way. So so it's magic once you start with breaking the fast. As I say, it doesn't have to be at 8 o'clock, but it does have to be the kind of what it is you're having is important.
Kate, it's been fantastic talking to you. I've had so much fun with you on this podcast. How can people get hold of you, learn more about what you're doing, the Be Sensational at 60 activities that we didn't even get time to talk about?
Yeah, so basically, it's Kate Cook. I am a corporate speaker, as we said. You can find me there on katecook.biz. I've just launched something for my demographic, which is going to be my journey discovering being sensational through purpose, wisdom, curiosity, and energy. And that is Be Sensational at 60. So you can find me there as well. But so depending on who you are and what you want, I've got something for you.
Thank you so much, Kate. And remember, everyone, this show is all about brain health, unchaining your pain. You're not stuck with the brain you have power to change it and make it better. And Kate's been here to show us how through the lens of nutrition. Thanks, Kate.
Thank you.